How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on this next tropical disturbance that's expected to move into the Caribbean and determine the chances that it'll develop into tropical storm Bonnie, which now the National Hurricane Center for the first time is giving tropical storm Bonnie a chance to develop right around the Caribbean into next week. But before I begin, or into this week, but before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. And now we have finally the latest update where now the National Hurricane Center is giving this a chance, tropical storm Bonnie a chance of developing later during the week, where of course the chance right now is still low. It's around a 20% chance of tropical cyclone formation, but it's definitely big progress when it comes to certainty with the forecast, because as you know, if you check my previous videos, I've been talking about this potential tropical storm for the past several days without the National Hurricane Center giving any indication of any sort of tropical cyclone formation. But now this is a huge step in terms of the certainty when it comes to tropical storm Bonnie, as now there is at least a good chance, or at least a possibility, that tropical storm Bonnie will develop within the next 5 days. And yes, while the chance is low, I don't want you to take that completely seriously just yet, because I easily think the chance will rise over the next several days once the National Hurricane Center gets a little bit more certainty, where even during the later period that the chance may be higher for tropical storm Bonnie to develop. So although the chance is low right now, that could definitely rise over the next several days once the National Hurricane Center actually gets a better indication and more certainty that conditions will be favorable further northward and in days beyond the 5-day mark from today. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. So now taking a look at what the computer models are saying. So it's not only the National Hurricane Center that has given a bigger indication that we will see tropical storm Bonnie. It's also the European model, which, as you know, over the past several days hasn't really been persistent on developing anything, while the GFS model run has been definitely the more persistent one on developing at least some sort of tropical cyclone in the Caribbean. So if we were to take a look at the European model, let me show you guys a precipitation map to really show you guys where the European model wants to develop the well-defined low pressure system. So over the past several days, to give you guys context if you haven't been keeping up, the European model wasn't really developing anything, and while the European model was expecting a plume of moisture to eventually move into the Caribbean like the GFS model, there wasn't really any well-defined low pressure system, at least in the Atlantic side of things, that the European model was developing over the past several days. But now we finally reached a point, the European has finally reached a point where now it's forecasting at least a small low pressure system to develop within this plume of moisture, and that's huge. And that definitely raises certainty a little bit that there could maybe be a tropical cyclone in the Caribbean later this week or into early next week, because now we have both of the two main computer models at least developing some sort of well-defined low pressure system that could potentially develop into tropical storm Bonnie under the right conditions. However, despite the European model wanting to develop a well-defined low pressure system just off the Caribbean, it still isn't really lenient on developing this necessarily into a tropical storm. While we do see the pressure drop down to 1,007 millibars, this could easily not be any sort of tropical storm or tropical depression, as it could just be considered a common tropical cyclone. A common tropical wave, because pressure right around 1,007 millibars may not necessarily be strong enough or produce winds that are strong enough to really be considered a tropical depression or tropical storm, which is certainly a possibility. And while the European model does strengthen it slightly, dropping the pressure down to around 1,006 millibars just off the coast of Central America, we do see that it sort of fizzles out as it moves over land, which is what the European model is forecasting with this storm, and doesn't really recover from that. And the reason why I believe the European model does not want to develop a tropical cyclone out of this is mainly due to the fact that the European model isn't expecting the convection to necessarily be high enough or sufficient enough for a tropical cyclone to develop off of that convection. Because if we were to compare the relative humidity levels between the European and the GFS model, you're going to see definitely some pretty big differences when it comes to relative humidity. Taking a look at the European model, while there isn't necessarily stable or dry air surrounding the low pressure system, the moisture, while it does exist over the Caribbean, it isn't so like very hyper it isn't very hyper humid right around this region, and there isn't a ton of convection as a result of that. So, but comparing that to the GFS model, look at how much more humidity there is. Look at how much more lift and convection there is, which is the reason why the GFS model not only wants to develop a tropical storm, but potentially a hurricane, because we do see the pressure drop according to the GFS model at a scaringly low pressure at around 980s and 970s, which is quite a strong hurricane that we're talking about just off the Yucatan Peninsula. So Central America needs to pay close attention, especially since the European model is leaning a little bit more to the GFS model, which could mean that the European model may be playing catch up when it comes to mimicking the GFS model's forecast, which could be the more correct one now that the European model wants to follow more of what the GFS model is stating. So we definitely could see a formable tropical storm if all the conditions play out right. Really all depends on how much convection there is, because if we were to take a look at the wind shear map, there isn't going to be a ton of wind shear either, and both of the computer models are expecting a relatively low shear environment throughout the Caribbean, because we do see that while an upper level low does move it towards the Yucatan Peninsula right around Thursday timeframe, we do see that the wind shear over this low pressure system is quite light, as there's a little bit of an upper level high over this low pressure system, which is creating a nice little area of divergence aloft above this low pressure system, which is allowing for more convection to occur and less this wind shear, the light wind shear, isn't necessarily destroying the storm structure either. So as a result, the GFS model does expect this storm to strengthen as a result of a lightly sheared environment, and as a result of an extremely moist and convective environment right around the Caribbean. While the European model also is forecasting a light sheared environment, but like I said, that's pretty much the main component that's limiting the European model from really wanting to develop its low pressure system into a tropical storm is really the lack of instability or convection, because the European model just isn't expecting as high of a convective environment right around the Caribbean. While the shear is low, that isn't enough, because you of course need a high amount of convection or an area of extremely low pressure for a tropical storm to form. And also another thing I want to point out is the land interaction will or could be an inhibiting factor for this low pressure system, because if this low pressure system moves over land for quite a while, then it's going to be very difficult for it to really structure itself and really transition into a tropical storm when it's dealing with so much land interaction, which increases friction and of course decreases convection as a result of its disconnection from the ocean, the very warm Caribbean water. So that's definitely going to be another factor. We're going to need to pay close attention to steering currents just to the north of it. In terms of steering currents, we do have our Bermuda high that's trying to steer this this towards the northwest and we do have a ridge that's expected to build right around this weekend over the eastern half of the United States that's expected to steer this further westward. Let me actually show you guys, and that will be key really in determining how far west this storm goes, because if it goes a little bit further west and this low pressure system is more likely to deal with land interaction which would inhibit this storm from really developing into potentially a tropical storm. So taking a look at the Syrian currents, we do have a pretty big trough, a pretty big dip, a noticeable dip in the jet stream, and we also have this ridge I was talking to you guys about located right around the western half, or at least the midwestern portion of the United States, that's trying to steer this storm to the west. And while you don't see a ridge right here, or at least the height anomalies above average in this region, there is a ridge right here that's trying to steer this northwestward. So it really all depends how these ridges maneuver themselves into this weekend to really determine how far west or how far east this goes, because that'll determine how much ocean interaction or land interaction this will deal with as it heads northwestward. So still a decent amount of questions, but the certainty has definitely risen from today compared to my previous videos over the past several days, which is certainly good news that now both of the computer models are at least now honing in on the fact that a low pressure system will develop just off of Central America. What really will be the key is how much instability there will be, how much of a convective environment there will be, how much moisture there will be, and also the land interaction. The wind shear will be relatively light, is based on what the computer models are saying. So we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to those two factors I just mentioned, the land interaction and the amount of moisture that will be in the atmosphere headed into later this week, because I'll determine if we see tropical storm Bonnie or not. Now, another thing we need to pay close attention to is the Saharan air layer forecast, which pretty much shows how much Saharan dust there is in the mid levels of the atmosphere, and the more Saharan dust there is, the more it prevents tropical cyclones from developing, because the Saharan dust sort of creates a temperature inversion in the mid levels of the atmosphere. Since the Saharan dust is so warm, it forces a lot of that surface air to sink, because of course cooler air mass sinks in the midst of a warmer air mass, and typically the surface air is a lot cooler than the Saharan dust in the mid levels of the atmosphere, which decreases convection that prevents an upward motion in the atmosphere, and as a result that prevents tropical cyclone development, because of course tropical cyclones need a high amount of convection to develop. Taking a look at the forecast, while we do see a large portion of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico getting swallowed up by the Saharan dust, we still do see the southwestern portion of the Caribbean I'm seeing just a little bit of an area where Saharan dust isn't very abundant, and while for the most part most of the Caribbean is dealing with Saharan dust, the concentration of Saharan dust might not necessarily be high enough to inhibit this tropical cyclone, but it's definitely something we're going to at least pay attention to over the next several days. Now, I'll take a look at my forecast regarding where tropical storm Bonnie will develop. So wait, let me go to my latest map right now. Okay, so here's my latest updated map regarding where tropical storm Bonnie could develop. We do see that I'm expecting, if tropical storm Bonnie were to develop, it will develop somewhere in this area, just off the Yucatan Peninsula and just off the coast of a lot of these Central American countries. Now, the land interaction will be key in whether or not this will develop, so make sure to pay close attention to that. And Central America, whether this develops or not, you need to pay attention to heavy rainfall, because that is likely associated with this plume of moisture moving through. So make sure to keep in mind that tropical storm could develop just off the Central American coast, as well as just off the coast of Cancun. You definitely need to pay close attention to that. In terms of the United States, I'm sure most of you guys are watching, it's still a bit too early to really hone in on where this storm will go, if it will move northward into the United States. So I'll make sure to update you guys regarding any sort of changes in the forecast. But anyways, guys, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. And I hope you guys all have a great day.